Doing things the hard way could be killing your creativity. And there's a reason that a lot of us do choose the hard way. And it's this odd romanticization that we seem to have as creatives of doing things in just the most obscurely difficult manner. There's this thought that the struggling artist is the only way to be authentic. You have to go through all these trials and tribulations. You have to take a step that is so unnecessary or use a tool that is just not really fit for purpose in 2026 in order to get the desired result, because you have to struggle. Now, I'm not discounting the fact that struggle is something that will actually really bring out the creativity of a lot of artists. Struggle is part of the journey. It's part of everything that you need. But when it comes to certain elements, there's just no point. And all you're doing is making life difficult for the sake of maybe saying that you struggled. And I think we've all, including myself, fallen into that trap. There is, of course, a flip side to this as well, which we will get into. And I also think there is a limit to how easy we can make things for ourselves. I'm going to get into that as well. But let's start with this idea of just making things a little bit easier and not taking away from the end product. So the reason this all came about is because of a group of tattoo artists that I interviewed. If you're not familiar with me, I'm James. Hi, welcome to Portfolio Box. And I interview creatives on this channel. I go out and I find some of the best, and we sit down and we talk about their craft. And recently I interviewed some tattoo artists. This video will be going up next week, so do get subscribed to check that out. And they spoke about a whole breadth of things regarding their industry, their art, how AI is impacting them, how social media works within their industry, how important it is. And they also spoke about equipment and this idea that this new style of tattoos, or I suppose this new way of creating tattoos, is not always accepted by everybody. And this really comes down to a coil machine versus a modern rotary pen machine. Now, we don't need to go into every single detail of the difference, but what we do need to know is that the coil machines generally require so much more adjustment, and you're fighting with the machine as much as you are trying to get the art onto the person. Now, obviously, they do the job. They have done for many, many years. But the argument is that a lot of artists, or some artists at least, will claim that they lack soul. They lack what is required to give a particular tattoo that artist's soul. What they're really saying is the artist needs to struggle to correctly showcase the art. Now, the tattoo artists themselves did say there's certain tattoos that they would prefer to use the coil machine on because of tradition. But if we were to put two tattoos side by side, one done with the coil machine, one done with the more modern machine, would we be able to tell the difference? Maybe an experienced tattoo artist would, but is it worth the struggle? Is it worth creating that friction for the sake of the artist's struggle? I would argue in this particular instance, probably not. And this is somewhat an equivalent of me right now. I am filming this on a digital camera, and you could argue very much that that is the correct medium for what I'm doing for YouTube. But there's a certain look that I like that somewhat emulates 1970s film stock, Kodak Eastman film stock. And in order to recreate that, I take a digital image and I apply this color grade that I want to look a certain way. So I'm kind of cheating. I haven't gone through the struggle of physically developing film or wrangling with 1970s film stocks and cameras and things like that for the video. I've cut the corner. But do I need to go and wrangle with 1970s film stocks? I think everyone can argue that that's absolutely insane. In some areas, that might make sense, but for the majority of people, it doesn't, myself included. So the easy method, removing the struggle, going with the more modern tattoo machine, going with the digital camera, whatever it is within your industry, picking the easy method is not diminishing your art. It's just part of a more modern process that I think you can completely just embrace without feeling guilty about it. Now that brings us nicely onto intent. And yes, a little bit of that artist's soul. While I don't think that the artist needs to use the more difficult process and they can use the easier process, there is a limit to this. There's obviously a point at which you need to be able to use that traditional method or that slightly more difficult method, even if it's not traditional, to get the correct look. And there's two examples. We go to the tattoo artists, and there's certain styles of traditional tattoo where they want to break out the coil machine because they feel that that is inherently part of the process for those tattoos. And I am absolutely not here to disagree with them. And then if we look on a much bigger scale, there's a huge discourse at the moment around lifeless, flat, uninspiring Disney and Netflix movies that are all shot against green screen, that are all color graded in the same way because the easy process has been taken. Rather than going out onto location, we can use these giant green screen systems that allow you to generate whatever you want. Now, this is by no means easy, but it certainly simplifies a process when you take something like June, for example. That is very much a film that was shot on location and it feels it. There's a visceral feeling to that movie that only comes from the fact that the actors were actually there on location. So I think there's a time and a place for both. I don't think as artists, as creatives, we should feel forced or pigeonholed into doing the difficult thing just for the sake of struggle. I think that's pointless. I think it's silly. And I think we can use the shortcuts. We can use the fast method. But I also think there's a time and a place where the soul of your art and the soul of a project can be found in the method used. And that method sometimes means you've got to take the more traditional or the more difficult route. And that leads me to my final point, which is when does easy become too easy? So we've spoken about incredibly difficult, a really hard, maybe traditional form of doing something, and how most of the time for a lot of us don't really need to do that, but it has its merits and it has its soul. Then we move to maybe the middle point, which is let's use some modern things in order to help us deliver what we want in a fast, efficient, artistic way, and we're not cheating by doing that. And then if you go the other way, we get to a point where we have to question, when does it stop being your art? When do you stop being the creative behind it? And this is part of a conversation I had with another creative, Kian Walsh, and he had created a full music video for a particular song that he loved, and he had done that using stock footage, AI, and had built prompts and then had edited the different clips that he generated together. And he very much views that as, well, I'm looking at AI as an assistant. So I'm telling AI what I want, and it's helping me generate things that I could not generate in any other way. So if we take that concept, we take this AI concept, how far can you push that before it's deemed not your idea and not your art? Is it as soon as AI generates something? Or is it as soon as you ask AI for an idea? What prompt do you give the AI? Is that where it stays as your art? Because you've chosen the prompt and you've chosen the idea, and from that you've got help from AI as if you were speaking to another person? Is the overall issue with AI the fact that it's taking other people's work and giving you the answers based on that? If it's generating, it's practically stealing somebody else's work to do that if it doesn't have their permission. If it's giving you ideas, it's pulling from other things that are out there. But would you not be doing that anyway? I don't have the answer to this. I just think it's an important question whereby we may have to define now or at some point in the near future, where is the end line? Where is the point at which we say this is not art anymore? And if we're talking about difficulty, and we've got this idea, I've presented this idea, that a more traditional method is more difficult, which it tends to be. Then you've got a middle ground. And then we've got AI, which I'm presenting as an easy option. But what if AI is not an easy option? What if your skill level to be able to insert a prompt and generate the images that you want and refine them actually moves you closer to a middle or even further away? It's just giving you the option to generate things that you couldn't do otherwise, to create things that you couldn't do otherwise. I personally don't use AI for any of my videos, but I think it's an interesting question. Where do we sit on this scale of difficulty, and how much soul goes into it, and how much is art and how much is part of us? I feel like I have a good handle on what I would deem as an acceptable substitute for a traditional method that is incredibly difficult. But is that different when we have a substitute for me sitting on camera in the form of AI generation? When does that stop being an acceptable substitute? Is it ever an acceptable substitute? I would really love to hear your opinions or your thoughts on this, because I think there's a huge raft, there's a can of worms to be opened on this particular topic, especially as you get to AI, and even your thoughts on what's an acceptable change. When are you allowed to step away from a traditional method and the struggling artist into something that is a little bit more streamlined? When are you allowed to step away from the Super 8 film camera to this? When are you allowed to use a digital camera instead of using an old, also digital camera, a film camera? Is there a reason there's a renaissance in film and older methods these days? There's a lot to unpack, and probably more than I could cover in this video. So I really would love to hear some thoughts and see what we can come up with. Thanks for watching. I'm James. This is Portfolio Box. Do get subscribed for that tattoo artist interview that's coming very, very soon. And let's go create some art.